Good afternoon and welcome to Exploring the ePHI Cyber Crisis and How to Fix It, a Health System CIO Media Inc. production sponsored by Tausight. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. My name is Anthony Guerra. I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of Health System CIO, and I'll be your moderator today. We're looking forward to your participation. You can send in your questions or comments at any time in the Q&A box, and we will take them later in the program. Just so you see how we're going to spend our time today, first we're going to go about 20 minutes or so with a presentation from Larry Ponemon, PhD, chairman and founder with the Ponemon Institute. And then we will have our Q&A. We're going to bring in David Ting, CTO and co-founder of Tausight. We'll get your questions in there and get those all answered. So without any further delay, I'm going to turn this over to Larry, who's going to do his presentation. Larry?
So we're covering a whole bunch of interesting and hopefully related topics. It's basically, we call it a crisis in healthcare, the PHI crisis, and it's putting the patient safety and privacy at risk and other associated related issues, excuse me. Healthcare organizations represented in this research, an average of 74 cyber attacks in the past 2 years. We'll talk a little bit, do a deeper dive on that number. About half, almost half of respondents say these cyber attacks resulted in the loss of confidential sensitive information. In other words, a data breach. And really what this is all about is the purpose of our research is to better understand all the challenges that healthcare organizations face in securing PHI, both within in the EHR domain and outside the organization. So it's a whole bunch of related topics. And we really love this work. Working with Tausight has been a delight. And hopefully David will be more interesting than me in presenting. I was just a research wonk, but that's probably the best role for me. I'm kind of a boring guy, even though I did fly an airplane many years ago. Okay, next slide. Beautiful. Okay, it's working now. So here's a kind of a statement. Some of the questions of the survey instrument, and if you'd like to see the survey, we'll make it available to you. Just let us know. And probably contact someone, maybe you, David, and we'll share the actual instrument. But we tend to use it, what's called an objective scale from strongly agree to strongly disagree. It's a nice way to look at responses. And the 7+ response is what we're looking at here. So strongly agree and agree. Our organization is unable to determine how much PHI exists outside the EHR, where it is, and how it is being assessed. 58% believe that statement to be true. In other words, they strongly agree. 58% is a huge percentage, by the way. Our organization is at risk because of the excessive presence of PHI across the data center endpoints and email accounts. 55% believe that to be true. So if we do no more than just focus on these two stats, you can see that if this is in fact true or perceived to be true by clinicians and other key stakeholders, that number is something to worry about. And we'll talk a little bit about to a deeper dive in a couple of minutes. Next slide, please. Okay, this table is very boring, but very important. So we'll talk about the importance. Our final sample for the study is 551 qualified respondents, or a 3.9% response rate. If you know something about research, and I know many of you do, the idea of a sampling frame composed of people in the healthcare industry, 551 respondents specifically, is a very significant achievement. When we do studies of healthcare practitioners, we're normally floating at about 300 to 450 on average. So getting 551 qualified respondents is a good sign, very good sign. Our sampling frame was for over 14,000 people that we've identified as having the right skill set. And we also removed people who didn't meet our ex-post responses or qualifications, I should say. So 3.9%, 551 individuals are what we're summarizing in the next several slides. Okay, let's go to our next slide. Thank you for moving the slides, Anthony.
Sure.
Okay, what best describes your healthcare organization? We kind of have four chunks. We have hospitals, healthcare service providers, clinics, ambulatory, and healthcare systems. And if you kind of look at the numbers, 60% is hospitals and healthcare service providers, which is a nice way of looking at this pie. In other words, each of the slices are large enough to do crosstabs and all sorts of interesting things. Maybe a little bit, we call it data mining, which is dangerous. That's not the purpose of research, but it's a good set of results large enough to do some interesting analysis. Let's go to our next slide, please. Next slide, we look at beds, number of beds as a surrogate for organizational size. And you'll notice that about 72%, if my math is correct, is 500, over 500 beds in the average organization in our study, excluding the ambulatory care. And so if you look at that 501 beds to 1,000, 1,000 to 2,000, and more than 2,000 beds, which is a huge organization like a large, well, I don't know, you could probably name the organization directly, but very interesting set of data in terms of the just organizational size. Let's go to another next slide. And in terms of the role of responsibility of the respondent, starting from information security leadership, and some, the title might be CISO or something that's not CISO, but certainly related to it. VPs, IT leadership CIOs, IT or network director or manager, IT security director or manager, so on and so forth. So we cover a whole bunch of different titles and approximate titles, which is good because that gives us the ability to cut and dice the data to look at interrelationships that may be salient. Next slide, please. Okay, now I'm not going to read all of this. This is too much to read, but the next several slides, we'll do a deeper dive on some of these. But what we found in the study is organizations lack the budget to invest in PHI protection technologies. The lack of budget could be very severe in some cases, especially for regional or local healthcare providers versus the large healthcare system. Current legacy technologies have difficulty protecting the enormous amount of PHI across these systems. Migration to the cloud and collaboration tools have increased the risk to PHI. The level of security risk to PHI created by remote care and assisting transmission of PHI outside the firewall is very high. And we'll kind of stop at that point because, again, we'll do a deeper dive to some of these later. Oh, like the last one I think is important. Current technologies are not improving visibility to PHI outside the EHR. Okay, next slide. This is fun. Thank you. I thought of a warped sense of fun. My dog didn't bark, and that's something to give thanks. Okay, next slide. Okay, a lot of data points here, but they're all very interesting. The way we capture data here, if you add it all up, it's going to be 500 responses on average. So it's to look at the top 5. Difficulty, what security threats? Difficulty in remediating workflow vulnerabilities. Explosion of virtual endpoints. Remote worker take PII and PHI offsite. That's a no-no. It could be a big problem. Data theft and extortion, other overprivileged clinical access, and others. So there's a lot of issues that we consider a security threat, and these are the ones that were identified by a qualified panel of respondents. Let's go to our next slide. What are the main challenges to securing PHI? Now, this is similar to the other question where we had exactly 5. Here we have exactly 2 choices per responses. So it should sum to 200%. The lack of budget, I mentioned that before, 52%. The lack of in-house expertise to manage PHI protection technologies, we thought that was pretty high, 48%. Lack of leadership or ownership of PHI risk, lack of awareness or prioritization of the need to protect PHI. And finally, last but not least, the lack of technologies that focus on protecting PHI. So these are the ones that we call main challenges. And there are a lot of challenges, even more so than the list here that we limited to 2 top choices. Next slide. Okay. The disadvantage of today's technologies. This is an important issue because sometimes we think that the solution is a technology. Sometimes it's more about human capital and getting people to be knowledgeable, and also technology. It's not like one is better than the other, but technologies and the human factor combined is going to give you the best possible result. And we've been seeing that not only in healthcare, but other industries as well for many, many, many years. We've been looking at healthcare organizations. We started Ponemon Institute now 24 years ago, and it probably close to 30% of all of our studies involve healthcare. So it's a very big part of what we do. Okay, let's see what we could say about this slide. 69% current cybersecurity technologies are not effective in identifying PHI or our servers and exploits. To understand what to put in the organization's secure storage. 69%, 66% is difficult for our legacy systems to protect the enormous amount of PHI across systems, especially legacy systems. You could read the rest. This is a disadvantage of technologies alone. The combination of technology and human is what you wanted, unless you want to insert a third category called artificial intelligence, which is kind of developing on the horizon pretty quickly in this space. Next slide. The ability to detect and classify structured and unstructured data. On the unstructured side, do we have the ability to detect and classify unstructured data wherever it exists throughout the expanding digital environment? 47% believe the answer is yes, on a 10-point scale, by the way, from low visibility to high. Ability to detect and classify structured data wherever it exists throughout the expanding digital environment. 39% believe that to be so. And 30% level of visibility into PHI located in the data center and endpoints where it is exchanged between doctors and patient systems or applications. Only 30% believe that they have a sufficient level of visibility on a 10-point scale. So this again is suggesting a big problem. Visibility is something that's hugely important if you're operating in the healthcare space, and or truthfully, almost every industry. I can't think of one that where it wouldn't be important. But understanding that in a structured versus unstructured environment is, I think, the main point of this slide. Excuse me. Next slide, please. Doing a great job moving these slides. Now,
Thank you.
rating the effectiveness of DLP, data loss percentage, and DSP. 54% of respondents say they use DLP or DSP type technologies. And the effectiveness of DLP and DSP in providing visibility into health, PHI on endpoints, networks, and 45% say it's not effective, so 55% not effective. Effectiveness of DLP and DSP in providing visibility into data movement of PHI, 42% believe that so. And then effectiveness of DLP and DSP in understanding movement and abnormal behavior related to PHI. These percentages are not as high as some of the earlier findings in this PowerPoint, but these are still very significant percentages. Next slide, please. This is kind of an estimated cost. We use an activity-based costing question in the survey instrument. So people usually start scratching their head when they see a number, a large number. So if you are interested in learning more about this particular data point, we would love to share that with you. We're very lonely up here in northern Michigan, by the way. So when you call us, we will give you the red carpet treatment, I promise you. That which would be hot cocoa or a brewski, whatever they call it here up here in the wilderness. That's why I left the beard grow, because I kind of fit into the weird people that are up in. I'm just joking. Okay, DLP and DSP software, it's about $250,000, and DLP and DSP maintenance and administration about 91. So if you roughly add it together, it's a pretty large number, especially for a mid-sized healthcare organization. Next slide. Okay, now we can move to the next section. This is cool. So this is now looking at the difficulty. Risk to patients when PHI data is breached is 1 not difficult to 10 very difficult. Difficulty in assessing how many patients were affected by the data breach, 71% say very difficult to get to determine the difficulty. Likelihood of over-reporting the number of patients affected because of the difficulty in determining the device or server, it was compromised. 47% believe that to be true. Again, not, but all of these are about difficulty on a 10-point scale. Okay, next slide, please. Now, these are days to recover and remediate the consequences of the data breach, 80 days on average. That's kind of a lot of days, but when you think about all the different activities that go on to kind of get back to where you were before the event, it's a lot of time, especially for a larger organization. But for small organizations, it's still very significant. So days to recover and remediate the consequences of the data breach at 80, and 76 days to assess the impact of PHI to be able to fully disclose the breach and notify patients. And these are large numbers. So, you know, probably the reality, the numbers are even larger than this. Is kind of a conservative estimate. Next slide. Now we're almost on the insider threat to PHI. I'm using Susan's computer. She forgot to turn off the.
That's okay. It's okay, Larry.
I love it. I love you guys, by the way. This is good. Okay, the insider threat to PHI. Next slide, please. Wow, a lot of stuff here. But one of the things in the survey we did, we added a question on the average frequency of attacks the past 2 years. And we provide from 5 attacks down to 4, down to 3, and so on and so forth. At top of the list, PHI is assessed and or uncontrolled devices and access hyper-connected endpoints or networks with varying IT security standards. That was a top 5 attacks on every 2 years on average. Emails are sent with unencrypted PHI. That seems to happen quite a lot. I know in my world, it happens to me personally. PHI is moved to an unknown USB drive and data is lost 5 attacks. And these attacks can be ranging very costly to minimal, but they're still an attack and it has to be taken very seriously. Next slide, please. Similar type of design. Here we're looking at how likely are PHI losses to occur based on a 10-point scale. Likelihood at the high likelihood, 8, down to 7, down to 6, and lower and forth, and so forth. PHI is accessed or uncontrolled devices and access hyperconnected endpoints or networks with varying IT security standards. The likelihood of this happening in the next 2 years is 8. And so these numbers have meaning in terms of the likely frequency that you would expect if you were a normal organization, healthcare organization operating in this environment. Next slide, please. All good things have to come to an end, and this is our caveats slide. Basically, is we do surveys, and we love surveys, and they're very reliable, and they provide wonderful data. But there are things that you have to be aware of, and the bias is the mother of all pain in this research world. Things that you can do to minimize it, but never totally get it completely off the research books. And so we have non-response bias, sampling frame bias, and self-reported bias. Now they are managed and they're not significant, but still to be an honest purveyor of research, you need to let you know about this. Okay, next slide, please. And there's our website, research@ponemon.org. And I think it's a good time to turn it back to you, Anthony.
All right, Larry, excellent. Thank you very much. So we're going to bring in David here. I've got plenty of questions for him. And feel free to send them in now and we'll take a look at them. So, David, I think the first question I want to start off with is when you saw these results, what caught your eye? What surprised you? What particular things were you like, wow, I didn't think that I was going to see that?
Wow. The first one I thought was, and Larry commented on this, getting 550 people to respond in healthcare to talk about sensitive information that they may have, especially around the number of cyber attacks that are loss of data. That is a significant number. 550 people responding and knowing Larry, you scrubbed your data, you know what probably the statistical variance around all that data. That was a significant number, and I think this is a very good representative view of what's going on in healthcare today. That was shocking. The second thing that surprised me was that data extortion and ransomware was a little lower on the scale than I thought, given the number of breaches that we're seeing that incorporates now today data extortion. I think that was like in the middle of the screen, if I recall, as opposed to like, gee, that is my number one concern, as opposed to loss of data into uncontrolled devices. But the information is excellent, and I was very pleased to see that we have a concern, that people are concerned with this stuff. We have a lack of budget always comes up in conversations to say, hey, we don't have enough in our budget to fix this problem. And yet at the same time, when I look at the 300 and some thousand, the big numbers, as Larry pointed out, that are being spent, and then their effectiveness, if I multiply that at a 50% rate, even at best, you're not getting a lot of value out of your current solutions, to be honest, without deprecating the solutions or demeaning, it's not working.
Great points.
Okay, a couple things there. So ransomware was lower on the scale than you expected. Do you have a theory there? Like a working theory of why it was lower than you expected?
I think there's a tendency to think that that is going to be a problem for somebody else. I think generally people don't think they're going to be a target of an attack. They're not going to be a target of a coordinated attack. I think Change Healthcare certainly in the past couple of months have changed their perspectives a lot. And I'm just trying to see if there's a ripple effect to say even a very sophisticated, very large organization could not secure their data. But we've seen this in other environments. What did I just hear? AT&T lost a couple tens of millions of records themselves. This is a problem. I think the combination of ransomware and extortionware is going to be the trend that we're going to have to deal with. And if you don't know where your data is, if you don't know how that data is being used, moved around, it's going to become a huge problem.
So it could be not that so we see that large entities who have probably very sophisticated cybersecurity can be breached. So there's no reason to think there's no reason for anybody to think we're so good that they can't get us. But we think that probably, at least my theory would be, it's we're not going to be the one they target. It's
Correct.
not that we're so good, it's just that maybe we're not so big, right? Or we're in the middle of the pack. We don't do a lot of research. I guess you could tell yourself a lot of things to say no one's going to target us. There's many more richer targets out there.
So I used to think that was a prevailing thought, and yet I know one of the dentist offices I work with, two physician dental practice got compromised, and he's telling me, he said, why would somebody attack a small suburban dental practice and take all our records, and he was ransomed. He said, I had to figure out how to pay to get a Bitcoin to get my data released to doc practice. So there is no escaping. I said, hey, they can do it. They do it because they can do it. And clearly they found the vulnerability, got in, and you had none of your data secured adequately, and they stole the data. So it's not that, gee, go for the big and powerful and the wealthy that have a big cyber insurance policy. Everybody, I mean, he paid for his Bitcoin out of his credit card account of all.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you mentioned the idea of people are spending money. It's not that they're not spending money, um, but they're still not. They say they don't have enough to do everything they need to do. And your thought was maybe they're not getting a lot of value for dollars. Is it possible that they're getting value for dollars, but the amount they need to spend to cover everything is bigger than at their disposal? Why was your thought that they might not be getting value for dollars?
Well, I think there's a couple theories there. One of the theories is that it's not finding the data that you need to protect. When there is that unstructured, finding the data that you want to protect is like going into your house and saying, I paid a lot for my perimeter security. I've got ADT. Oh, oops, I shouldn't say that. I've got a security system and I've got really good locks on my door. And gee, I sure hope nobody's going to break into the door. And I may even have a camera inside and outside. But throughout my house, I have cash, jewelry, valuables everywhere in the house. So the first thing you want to do when you consider that problem is today we have certain technologies. We have perimeter security, we have intrusion detection, we may have a data loss. Data loss basically goes, hey, maybe those confidential records, those personal records, your passport and your birth certificates and whatnot, should go into a vault. But you still have money, funds, cash everywhere, lying all over the place, jewelry. You need to start to understand that if you want to really secure that, find something that knows where all that stuff is and put them away, secure them. So isolating and identifying the ePHI, finding it in unstructured data and all over your hospital, over the tens of thousands of machines that you have, that's got to be one of your high priorities. And what we constantly see is that there's data. As we scrub machines, we find tons of data lying all over the place that should be considered sensitive. So a lost machine, a laptop that your doctor or researcher is walking out with every day, doesn't contain a possible avenue for a data breach.
So your point is that this is so important that for someone to sit there and say, I can't find the money, in my current budget to do this. You're saying that there has to be something in there that you could knock out because this is so important. You can't let this one fall off.
No, I don't think you can, given that the average cost of a breach these days, IBM, I guess, Larry, you did that research, is $10.5 million. That's a lot of dollars to spend and say, hey, I'm willing to spend that, but not put in better defenses for the PHI data that I have all throughout my hospital. That's like saying I have cash everywhere, and hey, if it gets lost, it gets lost. Somebody's going to pay for it.
It's very interesting, David, and I'm assuming you hear this or you people go out on prospect calls and things like that, and you hear this from time to time that, hey, what
Well,
you say makes a lot of sense. What you say makes a lot of sense. Your stuff is really great. I'd love to have it, but I don't have the money. And you're sitting there going, but you're flying blind. You
correct.
can't go on like this. Correct? That's kind of the dynamic.
That is correct. I think that's what makes this extra frustrating in some ways when people say, I really need to do this. Two things. I don't have the budget and I don't have the staff or the skills. And you could go, this is healthcare. The data records that your patients are entrusting to you for their care delivery, you go, hey, if it happens, it happens. It happens to we'll do the remediation. But I think there has to be a more conscientious effort to basically say we treat the patient records as critically as we treat any our patients in delivering care. I think there has to be that higher level sense of responsibility as opposed to saying, hey, I have these check boxes that I filled out. I have a DLP solution. I have a DSP. I have an firewall. But I can't, I know they're not doing the job for me.
So we've had some conversations recently, a lot of things around application rationalization, a lot of things about cutting waste out of the spending, things like auto renewals come up, things that you're paying for that you don't use. So I'm guessing there's probably some waste in there that for folks that say, I don't have the money, have you taken that super hard look at your budget and the money going out? And have you really made sure that there's not some waste in there that you can't get rid of so you can afford this important solution? Does that
Correct.
make sense?
I think there definitely is. I think there's that need. I think there also has to be a prioritization that, hey, we don't want to be a target for a breach. That means we've taken all the cyber hygiene steps associated with taking care of the patient records, whether it's securing them, putting them away, archiving the stale data that hasn't been touched in 5 to 10 years, putting them away, getting them off the systems, making sure that you don't have machines that don't have volume level or drive encryption for those devices that walk out the door, having tighter policies on USB drives, watching where your PHI is going in emails. I mean, we've seen, we all know that this occurs. There's emails going out with PHI to personal email accounts. They're going out through different avenues. There's constant leakage, but what you really want to do in today's world is really prevent the large volume breaches and saying, how does 120 million records slip out the door with nobody noticing it? How does that happen? That's just, I mean, I'm not pointing any fingers at anyone, but I'm just saying we have to do better at protecting these records. They could be, your patient's mental health records. It could be any number of things that would be terribly embarrassing to your patients or harming your patients. I think there has to be better accountability for that.
So how does it happen, David, when tens of thousands of records walk out the door or on a thumb drive or emailed? How does that happen? Does that say to you the cyber hygiene just isn't there?
I think so. Here's my theory. in the days when we had an analog record of that patient's record in a patient's in paper, it sat in a folder. You are limited by the weight that you can take out the door in any one physical in any one transaction. 500 records, which is your HIPAA breach limit. If every patient record weighed 4 ounces, that's 4 per pound. 500 records is 125 pounds of paper you gotta move out from the records department. Now imagine 1,000,000 records. That's 250,000 pounds of paper. We have a mindset that, hey, patient records were never an issue. Loss of patient records was never an issue. It's that transition from the analog space that we used to work with to the digital world, where you could lose millions of records on a thumb drive and not even notice it. And you're counting on the access controls and the permissions that you set on your computer systems to secure that. We know admin credentials can be compromised through credential stuffing. There's a probability of around 0.1 to 1.1% if you look at the stats. That means there's a possibility of an admin account being compromised. And with that goes the total amount of all the records that you should have had secured under that account. Similarly, user credentials can be phished. That probability is somewhere between 5 to 7% of success rate. That's high enough to lose a lot of data if your users carry 20, 30,000 stale records in their account. All these things are things that we can help reduce through better hygiene and just being more aware that these gaps occur. A laptop that walks out the door that's unencrypted. It's not important for them to have thousands of files that may have sensitive data. A spreadsheet that may have 10,000 patient records on it. We would have never thought of taking a briefcase when briefcases were the norm with that many records. So it's a transition, partly due to the transition from paper to electronics, that's causing us to let our guard down, I think, and not think, gee, how can somebody lose that many records?
Yeah, and so without, we don't want to be salesy here, but if you don't have a product like Tausight, is it like flying blind? I mean, or are there other ways to do it? I mean, or do you absolutely need a tool like Tausight's offering?
Oh, we built Tausight specifically to help identify the sensitive data you need to protect. Years ago, when I was on the cybersecurity task force, that was the major concern of all the government agencies, was that our healthcare system was a soft target. And not only is it going to be soft from a perspective of system protection, but also, more importantly, data protection. And that what they saw years ago was the potential for the data to have far greater value than just locking up your system and having you pay for the keys to decrypt all your files. Now it's really stealing the data. And so we built the system to allow you to see and gain visibility into that ePHI data that's sitting everywhere. Because frankly, it is. Are there other solutions? Sure, you can get better, tighter controls on your access to your systems, implement MFA, implement segmentation of all your admin credentials so you don't have one admin credential that can unleash the access to every account. You could participate in having better hygiene for stale files. Make the user accountable for, gee, why do I have 50,000 files in my folder? Why do I have 10,000 records in my email folder that has my patient records? So you could put a lot more onus on the end user, the clinicians, to do a lot more work. But you know what? Their job is to treat patients. They don't want to deal with cleaning up of folders. I'm as guilty as anyone else in my inbox. If you look at it, I have hundreds of thousands of emails from way back, years. Am I ever going to clean those up? No. Same thing with my folders. When I run out of storage on my computer, I go and buy another memory stick to stick into it and double my memory, or I up the storage. when a healthcare organization runs out of storage, they go buy more storage. So it's a natural part of our workflow these days. We create content and we hoard content. So the only way you're going to do that is to have the system be smarter about the content you're dealing with and help you manage that, to help the IT team manage that and make them aware of the workflows. Gee, why am I taking screenshots and converting them into text so that I can correspond with my colleagues? Why is this email moving out to my personal email? Well, it's because I need it when I get to my physician's office and I need to incorporate that. Well, that's part of the workflow that you should help them figure out a more secure way to do that. But there's also a lot of cleanup that needs to be done.
David, we need to know how many of those billion emails are unread.
Oh, outside of my spam filters?
Yeah, outside of your spam filters, because this is for everyone that's ever emailed you and never gotten a response. How
Oh,
many of them are unread?
he's pointing that out.
Yeah, yeah. No,
No,
I'm
it's
just
a
kidding.
lot, right? There's a good percentage. They just sit there. They sit there and
But
I have
but the
rules. So here's a classic example. I have rules. I have rules that go in to say, hey, if you see these terms, it's like a spam filter, but you kind of program it yourself. So I take that to the current generation of tools that look for sensitive data. They have keywords, they have who sent it. It moves a lot. It has a lot of false positives. I would
well,
love to have an AI machine that I can just say through prompting or some other mechanism or pre-trained AI models that can help me sort those out and say, here are the priorities. So that I believe in partly that's the approach we've taken. We've leveraged AI to help identify those sensitive data. So you're not going to use a blind spam filter to move things out. I mean, I just had a form that one of my lawyers sent. It ended up in a spam filter because they reprogrammed. I want something. I had to go find it.
yeah.
We want something that has a lower false negative and a lower false positive when it comes to identifying content. Same applies to data loss. Same applies to DPSM, posture management.
So the policies that are coming out, the requirements that are coming out are all about data sharing. You have to share it, right? And sharing puts it at greater risk. I mean, there's the right, there's it's what CISOs are dealing with. If they could have everything their way, it would, be tight. But they have to open things up and share. Um, is there anything that you've seen come out from a policy point of view that you say, man, that's going to be tough? Or you think it's all positive, the stuff that's been coming out about around data sharing?
I think data sharing is going to be a natural course in the workflow of clinicians, but you're not going to lose 100,000 records in data sharing unless you have some uncontrolled um, pathways that you didn't know about. I think having, will there be small lot leakages? Yeah. Will there be a huge flood? Hopefully not. But when you see the size of some of these breaches and you read the number of records, you go, that should have been stopped. You should have had better visibility. You should have better controls. We just don't.
Yeah. The things that were exacerbating the situation, making things more difficult, remote work, right? People working remotely, remote care, um, migration to the cloud, and technical debt were some of the things that caught my eye. So, do you want to go into any of those a little more?
I think remote work, there's probably a lot of PHI sitting on physician clinicians' home machines, even though they've been quote secured. It's relatively easy in many environments to just do screen copy, screen and save that content. I think the more places you move the data in an uncontrolled manner, the more your risk surface area becomes. If people are emailing content out to themselves, if they're emailing content to people who are not their business associates, that all increases your risk. The inability to see where your content is going, the inability for you to know where your sensitive data is being processed by applications, all increase your vulnerability to data breaches. You need to know, gee, what are the applications that open files containing sensitive data? You need to know what applications are moving them outside of your network, besides your email. I mean, I see all kinds of stuff going through browsers. We see applications that you go, why are they opening these files? Well, it's because they're not supposed to be. Other users have installed them. Some user has installed them. I mean, just given the large number of applications that people are using, given the large number of endpoints, all kinds of things happen in an environment, especially in a healthcare setting, because before you had it locked down, people have installed all kinds of interesting applications that you may not know about. And so getting visibility to all that is really, really important. It goes to pointing out that when you run a critical environment like a healthcare setting where the computer is your basis for care delivery, if you don't know what's going on, what's stored, what's being used, what applications, what users are using, what they're doing with the data, you really don't have much control over what happens. You just don't know what's going on.
Very good. Couple of the other concerns that caught my eye. Lack of expertise to fit the problem, which you mentioned before as sort of a frustration for you. When you hear that, you get frustrated. It's again sort of an excuse as to why we're not able to solve the problem. Either we don't have the money, um, or we don't have the people, which could be related. I don't have the money to pay the people. And also inadequacy of modern policies on data access. That sounds like something that could be solved without spending any money to institute a proper policy. But your thoughts there?
Yes. So every time we talk about data retention, for example, how long should the data be considered active before you either purge it or archive it? The most standard answer is, well, we have to look at our policy, which means that we really haven't figured it out. And we're still debating what's the best way to manage stale data. Is it a 1 year? Is it 3 years? Is it 5 years? Is it 7 years? And do all that data need to be sitting on spinning platters waiting for an attacker to steal? And so part of reducing your vulnerability to ransomware or extortionware certainly is reducing the amount of active data you have on the system. So that's like saying, gee, if somebody broke into my house, I don't have a lot of cash lying around because most of the cash is already put away in the bank. You want to basically reduce that surface area for somebody to come in and steal it. So the average number of days, the other thing that really struck me about Larry's results was the number of days it took to remediate. Well, typically when an attacker is on your system, healthcare has the longest dwell time of any other vertical, which means the attacker often is inside doing their intel, doing their reconnaissance on where the data is going to be. Where's the richest load of data that they can steal? We need to basically be better at tracking that so that we can reduce that surface area. And that goes back to, what's my policy? What's my retention policy? What's my access? How do I get to a least user privileged access model so that I don't have large scale sharing of certain users' accounts or large access by administrators of all the files? I mean, there's just basically no firewall in case one administrator's credential is compromised. And that all gets back to policy. And so you have to review your policy from, to me, a defensive posture. We talk to incident response legal firms, and I always ask the question, what's that 0-day regret that a IT team or a IT leader has on that morning when they call up the legal firm and say, we got a breach? It's what are all the things that you could have easily done in a preventative way to reduce your exposure or to prevent the breach in the first place. I think it's really thinking through these tabletop exercises to say, how could this happen? What could we have done from a resiliency perspective?
Question from
Versus reaction.
Very good question from the audience from our friend Bill Spooner. Is it a lack of budget or not presenting an effective messaging to get the budget? That's always a big issue we talk about with executives, especially CISOs, to have that executive presence to make the case properly for why you need what you're asking
Yep.
for. What are your thoughts around that?
I think so if you're a public institution these days, if you have a data breach, you fill out something called an 8K, which discloses all the details around a cyber incident. The closest you have in healthcare that the board cares about is the post-settlement breach that the OCR reaches with the organization, where all the details of, gee, what didn't you do correctly? It is basically put out in pretty descriptive terms. Most of them relate to, gee, you weren't really good at applying your HIPAA security rule and giving a thorough assessment of where the risks and vulnerabilities are to your protected information. That level of awareness, I believe, has to be translated into terms that the board understands. That means you need to basically pay more attention to the HIPAA security rule as it relates to protecting patient records, because once it's out, every legal firm out there is going to be after you for the class action suits, the individual lawsuits. And so that level of awareness for what it means to the board executives has to be made out. In a public company, the SEC forces you to do that, and that has made a difference. In a public company, you basically go, hey, I never want to be named in a lawsuit because we didn't do something correct in the cybersecurity space. We need to have that message translated by the C-suite to the board when they do their updates to say, here's why it's important for us to be protecting these records. Not only the fines, you're going to be named in all these lawsuits, and we see that all over the place. Post-breach lawsuits have gone up.
So, David, here's the thing that's like on my mind that's hard for me to understand. I do lots of CISO interviews, and obviously, the people that are talking to me, if they've decided to be interviewed about cybersecurity, they're probably on it, right? Otherwise, I'm never going to have heard of them. It's Larry would probably say that's a biased sample, right? I can't say, look, all these people, everybody's doing great because everybody I talk to is doing great. Well, people are only agreeing to talk to me if they think they know what they're doing. So I have that in my mind of, obviously everybody I'm talking to, they're on it. And yet it sounds like there is a large group out there that is not doing the basic stuff. And we know the information's out there between HHS, the different entities that are coming out, 405D, the HPH CPGs, if I have that acronym right. So there's lots of information, and they're trying to get really focused, and they're trying to boil it down and make it simple and clear. There's NIST stuff. There's a whole bunch of stuff. So you've got some basic information about the cyber hygiene, but yet, if you would agree with me, there seems to be, at least, and I think you're saying this too, there seems to be a contingent of health systems that are not doing the basics. Do I have that right? And why is that happening?
I think it's hard. I think it's hard to get a handle on how significant is the problem. What's my exposure going to look like? What is the potential risks in my organization so let's take a simple example. What happens if one of your machines gets stolen, or one of your laptops that constantly goes out the door every day is lost, is reported lost? What do? What data do you have on it? Most of the time you go, I have no idea what's on that encrypted. I have no idea whether it was encrypted. There is a checklist that you should go through just to go through these scenarios. But too often we hear, well, that's a lot of, first of all, there's a lot of work. And two, we have a policy that says there should be no PHI. But the reality is between what the policy states, what you implemented, and what happens in reality is a huge gap. And it takes people, it takes resources, takes skills, it takes that mindset to say, gee, I'm going to go and take that laptop from the doctor and say, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to encrypt it. Or, gee, you can't use those USB drives to take that data home every night. It takes work, it takes effort, and there's a certain amount of complexity to that. But without the visibility, you have no way to start. Where do you start? How do I know out of my 1,000 machines, which machine I should go and find that has all the most, what's my riskiest machine? I always go ask, what's your riskiest machine? Is it the laptop sitting on somebody's desk? Is it that desktop machine that's being used in the hallway that could walk out tomorrow? Where's all the exposure? How do I prioritize? How do I know what to do? And how do I lower my risk? Everybody's driven by risk remediation. Having visibility to that allows you to prioritize. It's the two doctors that, gee, they have 30,000 files each on their machines. I should stomp those down and say, please, can I help you reduce that? It's the 20 workstations that you have out in the hallway that's not supposed to have a single PHI file. They're sitting on some recycling folder, or they're sitting on the desktop because it's a shared workstation, or the laptops that your researchers are walking out the door with every day, but somebody didn't turn on the BitLocker encryption. Those are all risks that you don't need to take and don't cost you any money, but requires visibility.
And I'm guessing, when you think about the environment these folks are working in, tens of thousands of employees,
Oh,
100,000 devices, or, I don't know, I'm just making up numbers, but, and also there is no snapshot moment in time where everything stands still, right? I mean, there's
so
constantly devices being purchased, maybe without a centralization, maybe without the CISO ever being notified that this device was purchased. So it could be purchased, provisioned, and given out to someone. So, you may have never had that device on your radar that was just stolen with a whole bunch of stuff on it, and you didn't even know it was in the organization. And that's not even to mention M&A, right, David? Where, oh,
correct.
by the way,
We just
our 15 hospital health system just bought a health system. Now we have 4 hospitals. We just took on 1 billion more
correct.
devices. And oh, by the way, day one, they're all your responsibility.
That's the reality of managing an RT system that contains sensitive data. So here's an example. You have 10,000 endpoints. You have 9,000 users.
Hello?
Did we lose him?
He froze up there. All right, Larry, we'll see if David comes back, but Larry, this is a perfect opportunity to bring you in. Your best thought on why you got the participation you did in this survey. It was higher than David expected, which is great. Obviously, you have a name and a reputation that's going to make people comfortable. David has a name and a reputation that's going to make people comfortable. Is that why you think you got the participation you did here?
No question about it. I mean, firstly, we're viewed as an independent source of research, so that a lot of studies are done, and some are actually pretty good, but they're biased in a different way. So we're very careful to not overstate what we do or to avoid even understating certain key findings. But the moral of the story is, I think it's over time you develop a kind of a trusted relationship with key folks, and that has been very helpful to us. But getting 551 people was not our expectation. Probably estimated about 350 to 400. So the number is substantially larger than normal, and we're actually trying to figure out what was the magic, because we'd like to do this again.
Yeah, exactly. Always trying to figure out what the magic is when we do something successful. David, glad you're back. I'm going to ask you one final question, and then we're just about out of time. So And we just described the craziness, right? You and I went through the craziness that is being a CISO of a large health system that's constantly growing. What's your best piece of advice for that individual? And then we're going to let everyone go.
I think you protect your infrastructure using well-known technology. Today we have really good technology for protecting what I call physical IT. You have to start thinking about the logical IT, whether it's your applications and more importantly, your data. You have to know where your data is. You have to know what sensitive data you have to be accountable for. Gee, are they all encrypted? Or do they follow that NIST framework of treat your data assets like real assets? Where are
Yeah.
they? Where is it? Who has it? Is it protected? Monitor for what happens to it. Be able to lock and respond to attacks on it. I mean, the fact that you could lose millions of records without awareness, that's not right. You got to think about that. And I think it adds a whole new dimension to how you actually protect your most critical assets in a healthcare setting. It's not the computers. You could always rebuild a computer. You can't rebuild your data. You can't claw back your data once it's stolen. That's what we need to do in healthcare if we're really caring about how we treat our patients.
And even if you pay the ransom, you might not get it back. So that's not a good road to go down.
Not a good road at all. I
Yep.
mean, once your data leaves the security of what your environment, the patient is at risk. I
Yep.
don't care.
Yep. All right. Excellent. Regarding continuing education, you could use the final slide in this deck. You'll get an email when the on-demand recording is ready for viewing. If you want to work with us, you can reach out to Nancy Wilcox from our team and go to our website to register for upcoming panels. With that, I want to thank our panelists, Larry Ponemon and David Ting and Tausight for sponsoring and making this event possible. And thanks to you for attending. And with that, everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Larry.